Hey class, and welcome to BS200. This is from Gordon and Stewart. We are going to be in chapter 10, the prophets enforcing the covenant in Israel. And so here's a few things that I want you to know about this chapter, just some highlights that are important for you to understand when studying and looking at the prophetic books in the Bible. Um, More individual books of the Bible come under the heading of prophecy than any other heading. So basically what our author is saying is that there's more books in the Bible that come under the title or heading of prophetic than any other title or heading. Okay. And so there's four major prophets that you need to be aware of: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then there's 12 minor prophets, right? 12. And they're basically the final 12 books of the Old Testament. Okay. So the first major prophets are in the beginning, and the last 12 are at the end. Okay. These books were written between 760 and 460 BC. Okay. Why are they called minor prophets? Well, the books are called minor prophets because they're relatively short. Okay, nothing crazy about it. Major prophets, they're a little bit longer. They're longer books. Okay. Um, so here's what you need to know about the nature, okay, of prophecy. All right, these are prophetic books, and so right away the word prophecy comes into play. And so the prophets didn't they did indeed announce the future. Okay. Sometimes when we hear someone will hear this title prophetic book, and they're just automatically thinking of predictions, of foretelling of something that's going to happen way way in advance in the future. Okay. Or it's messianic prophecy or apocalyptic prophecy of some sort. But what you need to know is the prophets did indeed announce a future, but it was usually the more immediate future of Israel. Okay. Judah and other nations surrounding them that they announced rather than our future. Okay. So basically, these prophets, for the most part, were talking about the immediate future of the people that they were prophesying over: Israel, Judah, and other nations. Okay. I think something like there's less than 2% of Old Testament prophecy that has to do with the Messiah, and less than 5% specifically describes the new covenant age, okay, which is what we're living in, the New Testament times, and less than 1% concerns events yet to come in our time, okay? So, yeah, important to understand that concept, okay? Here's a few things that I want you to know about the function of prophecy in Israel. Here's important in this chapter. First thing you need to know is the prophets were covenant enforcement mediators. All right, let me say that one more time. They were covenant enforcement mediators. Okay. We explained in the preceding chapters how Israel's law constituted a covenant between God and his people, right? God made a covenant by providing them with the law. Okay. In Exodus, we see that he gave the Mosaic law, he gave the law to Moses. And so it was modeled, this covenant, after a suzerainty treaty, and thus containing both stipulations and sanctions. So basically, they made this covenant, and so God was saying, okay, as long as you follow this law, I will do my part in protecting you, providing for you, sustaining you, keeping you, all right, thriving, so you can thrive in this land. And so they made a covenant. Okay, this is where the prophets came into play. Again, they were covenant enforcement mediators. Okay, so God announced the enforcement, whether it's positive or negative, of his law through them, so that the events of blessing or cursing would be clearly understood. So the prophets were basically pronouncing or declaring the law, reminding of the people of their covenant and how they were doing well with it or not doing so well with it. Okay. Here's another function of prophecy in Israel. Number two, the prophet's message was not their own, but God's. Okay, it was not the prophet's message, but God's. Um, yeah, it was God, the one who raised up the prophet to speak his word to Israel. So God would handpick, hand select this specific prophet. I was just thinking about Jeremiah chapter 1. If you want to read just the first few verses about that, you're going to see how God hand selected, he ordained um, Jeremiah to be the spokesperson for Israel. Okay, and so they were their message was not their own, but it was of God's. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Number three, the prophets were God's direct representatives, right? As vehicles through whom God's word was delivered both to Israel and other nations, the prophets held a kind of social office, societal office. They were like ambassadors from the heavenly court who relayed the divine sovereign will to the people. The prophets were on their own. They were on their own neither radical social reformers nor innovative religious thinkers. No matter which group broke those laws, God's word through the prophet held punishment. Okay. So what we read in the prophetic books then is not merely God's word as the prophet saw it, but God's word as God wished the prophet to represent it. The prophet did not speak independently of God. Okay, the word of the Lord came. It's probably better translated. The word of the Lord was entrusted to. Okay, so again, yeah, they were ambassadors of God, and they did not merely represent God or speak God's word as they saw fit, but as God ordained it to be. Okay, and so they would speak God's message clearly and concisely. All right, and deliver it to um, their audience. Okay, number four, the prophet's message is not original. And here's just another thing that we kind of mentioned, but the prophets were inspired by God to present to their generation the essential content of the original Mosaic covenant's warning and promises. Therefore, when we read the prophet's words, what we read is not new in concept, but new in wording in each prophet's own style and vocabulary. So they were basically reiterating the law, which was the covenant, to the people of Israel because they were covenant enforcers. Okay. And so, yeah, just some things there. Um, Another thing that you should be aware of on page 99 is when you're reading the prophets, the way the epistles we encourage you to read it paragraph by paragraph to be able to get it contextually, right? And to know that most times in those paragraphs, the author was moving to another thought in that next paragraph. That's why it's good to read it this way. When you're reading the prophets, it's good to think oracles. That's how he says it. Think oracles. As one must learn to think paragraphs in the epistles. Okay, most of the time, what the prophets said is presented in their books in run-on fashion. That is, the words they spoke at various times and places over the years of their ministry have been collected and written down without any divisions to indicate where one oracle ends and another begins. So what it's saying is that these prophecies were collected over time, sometimes over years, maybe even decades of time, and they were put together into this small, for example, minor prophet book. And so what we need to understand is we have to understand that the sometimes divisions that are there, and sometimes these divisions are laid out for us, and sometimes they're not. Okay, so we need to know contextually what's happening. That this specific prophecy was for this time, for this moment, right? For example, I think our one of the examples here that it gives is, I'm trying to think, is it Amos or yeah, Amos chapter 5, and it gives examples of the verses and their different times in Amos's ministry, different messages being presented. So we just have to understand that specific idea when it comes to prophecy. Okay. All right. So that is, I want to encourage you to read chapter 10. There's some other things here that we can hit, but I think we're going to stop there for now. So thank you guys for listening.